Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Hi there. Today, we're going to begin the history of horror. As I've discussed last time, I'm going to make everything so much more difficult on myself by teaching horror backwards. Teaching history backwards, rather. It's easier for learning achronologically because you get a reference. You know, if you're a horror fan, you basically know how we are doing today in the world of horror. Of course, if you're watching this several years in the future, you can laugh at me for my predictions being wrong, I suppose, when I do make some predictions later on. Oh, I have my hot water. It's hot. And you will have an idea of what the horror genre was like a few years ago. But if you started reading from this is written in 1980. You may not have you may have an idea of what the horror movies of 1980-ish were, 79, 77 area, and maybe even read one or two of the books, but you're not going to get the same feel because so much has happened since then that the way things are today aren't reflected in the way things were in 1980. It's a changing genre, which is good. One of my predictions is going to change more very soon, which I think is very good. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's actually going to go into a period of remission a bit. I think we're due for a period of remission in horror. But as Stephen King points out in some of his stuff, horror is never going to go away because it makes a lot of money easily. It's a good fright film is usually cheap, can be cheap, and can be very lucrative monetarily. Blair Witch was the example he used in this essay, What's Scary? This one in the corner here, on the side. In this version, of course I'm using this version, but I have this version on audiobook. So I'm listening to What's Scary over and over and over again. I'm going to go into more of that tomorrow. Today is going to be weird. Weird. But that's okay. I'm up for it, I hope. But as King says in What's Scary, you can have inexpensive horror movies, and often inexpensive ones are the ones that work a lot better than the big budget ones. They scare a lot more, and then are more successful in the box office. He uses Blair Witch as an example, which was shot in a shoestring and made like a factor of 100 times profit or something ridiculous. The ticker tape's still rolling in Blair Witch, and plus it influenced so much other horror for the next 10 years afterwards. Is it 10 years now? I actually should have checked that before I started the video, but I didn't. And of course Paranormal Activity, which is starting Paranormal Activity 5 is coming out this year, I think. It's 2013, so I think it's 5. And the first one or two of those were low budget. I think they've gradually gone up and up in budget and gone down and down in quality. And down and down in profitability, I think, as well. But that just could be sequel marketing, too. What has been going on in horror is a continuation of what the video that I said I was going to talked about the 2000s. The video, actually the link is at the bottom here. I don't know if I can put link into the actual screen. Well, if I can, I'll do it. If I can't, oh well. You can type it from here. Josh Howard is the person who presented the video on horror, philosophy of horror, and he there's a little bit of my goodness, history of horror. The double H's are not hurting me, are not helping me. I'll get there. I can't talk at all, apparently. So, this youtube.com at the bottom is the video link. I don't recommend it. I mean, the history of horror is very good. If you are interested in the psychology of horror, which I don't want to get into, you can watch his stuff. He does go over it, and it's not bad. But he's giving a lecture, and he's interrupted fairly often. And the sound's not great, so you can only hear his side of the conversation when he's interrupted, or you hear chuckling from the guy who's interrupting him. And he's not really keeping their attention as well as he'd hoped. But it's not bad, and it actually gives good, updated history of horror, which I'm going to borrow. Some of, anyway. So he says the 2000s were a hodgepodge. They were some torture, big on torture films, which started in the 90s with, let's see, he said continuation of the 90s. He uses the example of Misery from 1990 and The Audition from 1999, and then going into 2004's Saw, 2005's Hostel, 2008's The Collector, which I don't know if he uses as an example, and then 2012 The Collection, and then Saw 2 through 7, or whatever the heck we're up to now, and Hostel 2, I think they did Hostel 2, The Collection, The Collector, which is one sequel to the other, and they're just, let's find weird ways to kill people. Torture films, that's what he calls them. He of course says that they'd go back to the 60s when, you know, they're going after anything to make blood. Now that when they're allowed to, once the censorship restrictions lifted, and then remakes, of course. A lot of remakes in the 2000s. I actually have a list here. His list is Amityville Horror, which was in 2005. It was originally in 1979. The Hills Have Eyes was 2006, originally 1977. Black Christmas was 2006, originally 1974. Wicker Man was 2006, originally 1973. Prom Night was 2008, originally 1980. My Bloody Valentine was 2009, originally 1981. Friday the 13th was 2009, originally 1980. Nightmare on Elm Street was 2009, originally 1984. You can add to that this year's Evil Dead, which is 2013. It was originally 1981. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was remade this year for 2013, originally 1974. Last House on the Left is one that King talks about. He's very impressed with the remake in What's Scary. Last House on the Left was 2009, originally 1972. He hated the original Stephen King, coincidentally. Dawn of the Dead. King also liked. I think he liked both of them. He's a Romero fan though as well. Dawn of the Dead was 2004, originally 1978. Halloween 2007, originally 1978. King also mentions and likes. The Thing was done in 2011 and 1982. Fright Night was done in 2011 and 1985. Willard was done in 2003 and originally in 1971. And then there's some Japanese remakes that were in there as well, but I sort of want to keep those for when I talk about cultural difference between horrors. Cultural horror anthropology, I guess, would be. Which I'm hoping to be more roundtable-y, which means I should get these videos up sooner rather than later. If I'm putting them up at all. Yeah, I should. Anyway. So, continuation. Obviously, as I said, this video, Josh Howard's video, was done in 2012, I believe, and I do have some 2013s, and I have some that I didn't mention as well. One that he doesn't mention, one section that he doesn't mention in here is zombie movies. Zombie movies have been ascendant. Where vampire movies sort of were mid 80s to mid 90s, zombie movies were mid 90s to 2005, 2007, even up till today. There's World War Z's being made. I don't think it's out yet. No, it's not out yet. World War Z is being made. Max Brooks is World War Z, which I found out today he's Mel Brooks' son. Can you believe that? That's weird. I just thought it was a guy named Max Brooks. It's Mel Brooks' son, and Bancroft as well. Good on him. He's I'm going to talk about another son of a famous person as well, because I'm going over Joe Hill today, because I found out Horns is being made into a movie. So when we're talking about that was movies of 2010, 11, 12, 13. Books, I'm going to go over Horns, because it's one of the few that I've read this time of that period. But for movies, zombies are still in ascendancy. I think that's going to be petering out soon. I sort of hope it is, because you can only go so far with zombies before, well, with any group. I mean, I could hope for a werewolf thing. I don't think werewolves are going to come back soon. If the 90s to 80s to 90s was, a 12-year stretch of vampires, and the late 90s to 2010-ish were a stretch of zombies. That's about the lifespan, 13, 14 years for a genre run, until it comes around again. Of course, these are in cycles, as King points out in What's Scary, and in this as well. Pardon me. And, of course, it'll cycle over again. So I'm not sure what'll be next. Demons, maybe? With Horns, you might have a demon thing coming up. I did look up some directors. There's some good movies going to be coming out. Guillermo del Toro's doing a Frankenstein version in coming up. He's doing it At the Mountains of Madness, I think, something along those lines, which is a Lovecraft book, of course. What else was it? He's doing Drood by Dan Simmons. I was going through my list of authors. I just did horror searches on Google. Top 25 horror books of the last 25 years or something like that, and I went and I compiled, and best 10 books of horror books of 2010 through today or whatever, and I compiled and tried to get names together. And then of course I worked in the bookstore for 7 years, not too long ago, so I sort of didn't have my finger on the pulse, but I knew what was selling and what was big. The three big horror writers that popped up most recently, I haven't read their books. Two from the post-2010 era. Justin Cronin is doing the Passage series. The first one was in 2010, And Deborah Harkness is doing the Discovery of Witches series, which started in 2011. I haven't read either of these. I hear both are very well reviewed. These are the supposedly new emergent authors. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more that should be in that list, like David Wong. I haven't read either, but he's going to be. John dies at the end, and this book is full of spiders. Is very well received as well. That's one becoming a movie. I think that's already out as a movie now. Joe Hill, of course. He started in 2004. David Wong started in 2007. So it's of the era that I'm trying to talk about. Dan Wells, one of my favorites. The John Wayne Cleaver series. I'm not a serial killer, Mr. Monster, and I don't want to kill you. About a kid who's this close to being a serial killer. And he's trying to fight it because his mom asks him to. He knows that it's wrong, even though he doesn't really understand the concept of wrong. So he has rules against being a serial killer. It's a great series. And then he starts fighting demons because demons show up. How great is that? Action-y horror. Good series. I don't know if there will be more to it. I hope there is. Dan Wells. I recommend Dan Wells. But then again, that series started in 2009, so I can't really count it here as much as I'd like to. Glenn Duncan, which I thought was a new author, turns out he started way back in, well, not way back in 97, but back in 97. His book that I really enjoyed is The Last Werewolf. He did one hell of a great werewolf novel. The sequel is Tallulah Rising, and that's out now. I just haven't read it yet. It's on my list, but I'm broke. So, I was trying to think. Robert Kirkman is definitely someone who should be brought into this discussion. Robert Kirkman is not someone everybody heard of, but if I said The Walking Dead, which is his brainchild, oh yeah, everybody knows The Walking Dead, even if you don't watch The Walking Dead. I don't watch The Walking Dead because I don't watch TV. And I haven't read the graphic novels either, so I'm sort of behind on the times on this one. But it's well received, so I'll, thumbs up it, whatever. So that was he started that in 2003. Let's see. Guillermo del Toro's first book was in 2009. The Host? It's the Vampire Plague one. So, of course, that's sort of in the area as well. But he's been a director as well. As I said, Pan's Labyrinth, of course, I'm sure most people are familiar with. Mimic. As I said, he's doing Drood by Dan Simmons, which I thought was also a more recent author, but he's started back in the 80s. So I was off on that one. 85 he started, according to my notes. He's doing Drood, which is a sort of Jack the Ripper type story. He's doing a Frankenstein, and he's doing At the Mountains of Madness. Or he's sort of doing At the Mountains of Madness? I'm not sure. I read it a few hours ago, so I've forgotten already. as it usually works, unless I write notes, which I didn't. As I said, Max Brooks, he did Zombie Survival Guide in 2003, and he did World War Z in 2006. So, of course, that's the continuation of the zombie theme from the late thousands, or early late 90s to today-ish. 'Ish. And of course, in that genre, you have Shaun of the Dead types, Island of the Dead, Zombieland, the remake of Dawn of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Romero's, which is also King talks about, and we'll talk about tomorrow when we talk about King's. What's scary. When we talk about 2000 to 90, basically, or 00 to 2010. Now we're doing post-2010, which is still tough, because no one's writing about post-2010, so I don't really have someone to lean on. So I'm floundering a bit. I'm not afraid to admit it. So, a lot of that was Max Brooks. Max Brooks' Zombie Survival Guide especially is a go-to for all the zombie fans. Maybe it'll be witches. Considering there's Discovery of the Witches and, a few more things that are sort of witchcrafty, maybe we'll have a witch grouping. Or demonic grouping, considering Joe Hill's Horns is being made into a movie. This was came out in 2012? 2010? 2010 or 2012? What do I have? Do I have the notes on it? Probably not. Joe Hill. I don't have the notes. 2005 was 20th Century Ghost. 2007 was Heart-Shaped Box, which was a great ghost story as well. Unanchored Ghost Story, as I've mentioned in my section on ghosts. And then in Horns was... what does it say in here? I don't know if it will, because this is my cheat copy, is my advanced reader, because... apparently 2009. But it's certainly in that era. This is by far one of the most tragic love stories I've ever read in my life. It's one of the most disturbing books I've ever read in my life, and it's a damn good horror novel. Not sure if it's going to be a good horror movie. Daniel Radcliffe as Ignatius. Perrin? It is Perrin, right? Oh, and it's... Hey, thanks, Joe Hill. I have this signed. That's awesome. Oh, man. He's great. Parrish. Ig Parrish. And Marin Williams. God, they make Romeo and Juliet look tame. Romeo and Juliet are kids. And most adult readers of Romeo and Juliet realize that they're kids. They're 14 and 18. These are adults. These are what real love is, and it's so beautiful, so heartbreaking. Over and over again, you're just crunched. It was so disturbing reading this book. It hurt me. Not necessarily because it was super scary. It was intense. But just the heartache. It's heartbreaking. Oh man, it's being made into a movie, and Daniel Radcliffe's going to be Egg. I guess because it's not. Egg isn't supposed to be it's supposed to be a young cat. Oh man, they are the couple though. You want to know about true love? You read Horns. There's not many horror books that you can say that about. So props to Joe Hill on that one. Oh man, I got nothing. And of course, this was 2011, so that's in our section, The Last Werewolf by Glenn Duncan. But he started writing he wrote earlier stuff back in 97. So, not sure. I would love to see more werewolves like that. It's tough to do werewolves good. Engagingly good. Of course, as we go backward, I'm going to be pointing them out because, I love friggin' werewolves. And I'm like, okay, this is a great werewolf. Pardon me. 90s were a good werewolf time, but they're always in the background. They're never forefront. Cursed in the early 2000s. You had Ginger Snaps in the late 90s. Well, maybe early 2000s too. They didn't have their own heyday though. They were sort of grouped in with vampires because they had Underworld and stuff like that too. So I guess they did have a mini heyday, but not a big one. I just thought of something interesting. That's for next time. That's cool. Anyway, or maybe it's for way further down the line. Make a quick note. Home. Sorry, folks. Posing questions to myself. Anyway. So, another one. I don't know how to count him either. I'm definitely going to go over him a bit more when I go over horror anthropology. I'm basically going to push him to the side till then. And goodness gracious, am I even going to pronounce his name correctly? Probably not. In 2004, he wrote "Let the Right One In," and it was English. It was published into English in 2007. Swedish author by the name of John Ajvide Lindqvist. Agvide is his middle name. John is the first name. I can do John. And then Lindqvist. Qvist. Lindqvist. I'm not going to say that right. Sorry, guys. Sorry, John Lindqvist. I apologize. Let the Right One In. He, vampire tale from '07. Trying to reimagine the vampire tale again. And then he did a zombie one right after that, Handling the Dead, or Handling the Undead. And I think he's come out with another one. He's come out with several more in Swedish. I've tried reading Let the Right One In. I couldn't get into it. I was 100 pages in, and it took me like 2 weeks to read. And I was this is too much for me, and it was too Swedish. The Swedishness was distracting to me, which isn't good. Maybe it's just a bad translation. I hate blaming translators and stuff. Maybe it's just me. When the Swedes talk about food, I'm always distracted because I think their food is really weird. My apologies. I'm not trying to be offensive. But when I read the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo books, whenever they mentioned food, I'd have to pause for a whole minute thinking, really? That's what you eat? Meatballs with lingonberries? And Let the Right One In, they talk about crepes with shrimp in it. I was like, I had to put the book down for a day. I was like, what the heck are crepes with shrimp in it? Maybe it's probably just me. I get distracted by Swedish food. I don't understand what a crepe with shrimp in it. That sounds awful to me. Or what meatballs with lingonberries, which is what distracted me in one of the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo books. Millennium series, whatever. How's that for a topic derailment? So, next time, folks, we're going to go over 2010, back to 2000. Not necessarily in that order. We're just talking about that decade. I'm not going year by year backwards. That's going to be too much trouble for everybody involved. But we can take chunks a decade and see, okay, this is what influenced this. So this decade, of course, is influenced by the zombies that What's Scary talks about. And also in What's Scary, the Blair Witch influence of technique, the movie-going technique of lo-fi. Actually, this is something else that Guillermo del Toro was talking about. Using sort of lo-fi-ishness to enhance the movies, or as a tool in his box of movie making. Oh, and he's making the host into a mini series on television. That's his book, so that's why I had him in my author list. We're going to be talking a bit about him tomorrow, because we're going to talk about what King says about him, because he liked Mimic a lot, and we're going to talk about Pan's Labyrinth, because we like Pan's Labyrinth a lot, etc. So, and the other things, of course, were from Josh Howard's. We're influenced a lot by the torture films from 2000s, hodgepodge, that's his term, and then of course remaking things. Oh goodness, am I that far behind? I am that far behind. Did I not talk about that at all? Okay, so I guess what we're going to be thinking about, what's going to change, what we hope is going to happen, because I think this will be cool, is genre bending. I think there is going to be some genre bending, and I think it's because of books like Horns. Hopefully, movie like Horns. Hopefully, the movie is as good as the book. I know it never happens, but one can hope. One thing Stephen King says is horror fans are perpetual optimists. We keep hoping that these awful movies are going to be good, and we're always disappointed, but we keep watching. I'm hoping Horns is good. Oh, if it's good, it will blow everything wide open. In the same way that Cabin in the Woods blew everything wide open. We're in for a genre. I think we're in for a genre-bending time. Nothing's safe, which is a great thing for horror. When nothing's safe, oh my goodness, everything's up on the table. Anything can go. Yeah, Cabin in the Woods was twisted. Genre bending. Literally, it took the genre and bent it into little pieces, and then broke the world. So, if that happens, I'm hoping it does. I hope that trend's going to continue, because I think it's a good trend. I'm not even know if it is a trend, but giving people what they least expect, which is supposed to be what genre is about anyway, or suspense, or in a Hitchcockian way, giving people what they least expect. There was from one of the interview books, I think, in the Chuck Miller and Tim Underwood books of Stephen King interviews, someone made a point of Stephen King sells you what you know you don't want. I think that's the quote. And and it sells you what we don't expect as well, which is how what I'd add onto it is what horror is supposed to do. So yeah, we're going to talk about that all tomorrow, and then we're going to see, okay, well, since I do have the video bit up on the 2000s when I'm talking about the 2010s, I'll put up the 90s when we're talking about the 2000s. Say, okay, well, how did the 90s influence the 2000s? So now we can keep going, stepping back and back and back a little bit further, and we keep going, and we keep centered on, how we are today, and where we are today. Alright, folks. I think that's it for me. Tomorrow I'm going to be continuing with History of Horror. So long from me, Drew, on horror analysis. I'll see you next time. It's good. One of my predictions is it's going to change more very soon, which I think is very good. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's actually going to go into a period of remission a bit. I think that we're due for a period of remission in horror. But as Stephen King points out in some of his stuff, horror is never going to go away because it makes a lot of money easily. It's a good fright film is usually cheap, can be cheap, and can be very lucrative monetarily. Blair Witch was the example he used in this essay. What's scary? This one in the corner here, on the side. In this version, of course, I'm using this version, but I have this version on audiobook, so I'm listening to What's Scary over and over and over again. I'm going to go into more of that tomorrow. Today is going to be weird. weird. But that's okay. I'm up for it, I hope. But as King says in What's Scary, you can have inexpensive horror movies, and often inexpensive ones are the ones that work a lot better than the big budget ones. They scare a lot more, and then are more successful in the box office. He uses Blair Witch as an example, which was shot in a shoestring and made like a factor of 100 times profit or something ridiculous. The ticker tape's still rolling in Blair Witch, and plus it influenced so much other. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Hi there. Today, we're going to begin the history of horror. As I've discussed last time, I'm going to make everything so much more difficult on myself by teaching horror backwards. Teaching history backwards, rather. It's easier for learning achronologically because you get a reference. You know, if you're a horror fan, you basically know how we are doing today in the world of horror. Of course, if you're watching this several years in the future, horror for the next 10 years afterwards. Is it 10 years now? I actually should have checked that before I started the video, but I didn't. And of course, Paranormal Activity, which is starting Paranormal Activity 5, is coming out this year, I think. It's 2013, so I think it's 5. And the first one or two of those were low budget. I think they've gradually gone up and up in budget and gone down and down in quality. And down and down in profitability, I think, as well. But that just could be sequel marketing, too. What has been going on in horror is a continuation of what the video that I said I was going to talked about the 2000s. Yeah, you can laugh at me for my predictions being wrong, I suppose, when I do make some predictions later on. Oh, I have my hot water. It's hot. And will have an idea of what the horror genre was like a few years ago. But if you started reading from this was written in 1980, you may not have you may have an idea of what the horror movies of 1980-ish were, 79, 77 area, and maybe even read one or two of the books, but you're not going to get the same feel because so much has happened since then that the way things are today aren't reflected in the way things were in 1980. It's a changing genre, which